My family decided to order takeout and asked my sister's kids what they wanted. As my children waited their turn, my mother looked at them and said flatly, "Your kids can eat whatever scraps are left in the kitchen. They're not guests here." My sister smiled, "And don't forget, I'm staying all week, so you're covering my meals too." My father added, "Now go set the table like a good little servant." I left without arguing, took my kids to a fancy steakhouse, and made one phone call. A few hours later, the house was in chaos. I should have seen this coming. The favoritism had been creeping in for years, yet I kept hoping it would change. I'm Noelle, 34, a single mother to two wonderful kids, Alyssa, 10, and Owen. My sister Michelle, 36, has always been the golden child, married well, living in a nicer house, and somehow that made her children more deserving of attention than mine. It was a regular Sunday when I drove to my parents' home with Alyssa and Owen. We'd been invited for what I assumed would be a family meal. My parents, Robert and Linda, both in their early 60s, still lived in the suburban house where Michelle and I grew up. A place packed with memories, both good and increasingly difficult. Michelle was already there, with her twins, Sophia and Mason. They were sprawled on the living room couch, tablets in hand, acting like they owned the place. My kids stood politely by the door, waiting to be noticed. "Oh, you're here," Mom said without looking up from her phone. "Michelle, what do you and the twins want for dinner?" "I was thinking of ordering from that Italian place you like." Michelle barely glanced up, painting her nails a bright pink. "The twins want pizza. Tony's not that cheap spot. And I'll have the seafood linguine with extra shrimp." "Of course, darling," Mom replied, already scrolling the menu. Her voice shifted instantly when she asked the twins, "What about you two?" Warmth poured into her tone. Sophia looked up, with the entitled expression I'd come to recognize. "Extra cheese and pepperoni." Mason wanted the same, plus sausage. "Perfect. Grandma will get you exactly what you want." Dad settled in his recliner, offered the twins snacks and drinks, and never once acknowledged Alyssa and Owen. My children remained quiet and patient. Alyssa tugged my sleeve. "Mom, when can we tell them what we want?" I squeezed her hand. "Just a minute, sweetheart." Minutes passed. Mom kept scrolling and asking Michelle about appetizers and desserts. Dad focused on the TV. My kids looked like invisible guests. I felt that tight ache of familiar disappointment. Finally, Alyssa stepped forward with a child's bluntness. "Grandma, what can Owen and I have for dinner?" The silence afterward was heavy. Mom looked up, annoyed as if Alyssa had interrupted something unimportant. "Your kids can eat whatever scraps are left in the kitchen. They're not guests here," she said. Cold. The words landed hard. Then Michelle smirked and added, "And don't forget, I'm staying all week, so you're covering my meals too. It's the least you can do since Mom and Dad are letting you use their guest room." I wasn't staying at their house. I lived 20 minutes away. Before I could respond, Dad spoke without looking from the TV. "Now go set the table like a good little servant." The room felt like it collapsed inward. Alyssa's eyes welled up, Owen's jaw tightened. They were old enough to grasp what had happened. I could have exploded. I could have demanded an explanation, called them out for treating my children as if they didn't belong. I could have ripped into Michelle for assuming I'd pay for her meals when she can afford them. But I stayed calm. Sometimes the most effective response isn't a scene in a living room. "Come on, kids," I said, voice steady. "Let's go." "But Mom, aren't we staying for dinner?" Owen asked. "We're going somewhere better," I replied, taking their hands toward the door. Michelle called after us, annoyed. "Where are you going?" "Out," I said, without turning. Mom sniffed and said, "Don't expect us to save you any food." I walked out anyway. Buckled into the car, Alyssa finally asked, "Why were they so mean to us?" I gripped the wheel. "I don't know, sweetheart. But tonight we will have something much nicer." "Where are we going?" Owen asked. I smiled for the first time that afternoon. "Morton's Steakhouse." They gasped. Morton's was the upscale restaurant downtown we'd always driven past, but never visited. It cost more than I usually spend on groceries in a week. But Mom, that's so expensive, Alyssa said. Practical as ever. Tonight we're celebrating, I replied, and pulled into the lot. The hostess at Morton's was everything my family had not been: warm, welcoming, and genuinely pleased to see us. She seated us at a window table with bread, lemon water, and menus that made my kids' eyes light up. Can I order anything? Alyssa whispered. Anything you want, baby. They ordered like kids should. Owen chose a fillet similar to what adults get, and Alyssa picked chicken tenders, the deluxe kind, with truffle fries. I had salmon and a glass of wine I couldn't really afford. While they were excited over their meals, I stepped outside to make that phone call. Hello, Robert, I said when Dad answered. No, why are you calling? Aren't you coming back to set the table? No, Dad. I'm not coming back, but I wanted to let you know I've made some calls. There was stunned silence. For 5 years, I'd handled bookkeeping and management for my parents' rental properties, rent collection, maintenance coordination, taxes, and tenant issues, all without pay, because we're family. I'm resigning, effective immediately, I told. I've notified your tenants that they have a new contact for maintenance. You can't do that, he sputtered. I reminded him there was no formal employment contract, and no notice required. Also, your tax records are at my house, I continued. You'll need someone else to organize and deliver them to Mr. Peterson before the filing deadline. He began to calculate the consequences. I wasn't finished. I told him I'd called David, Michelle's husband, about Michelle's supposed week-long stay at their house, and that David was unaware of any such plan. He thought she was visiting a friend in Chicago. Silence lengthened. David had questions. He'd noticed Michelle disappearing and was suddenly very interested in where she'd been staying. I also called Aunt Patricia, who oversaw the family trust that supplemented my parents' income. I told her how my kids had been excluded from family photos and how they'd been treated. She was upset. You had no right, Dad protested at one point. I had every right, I said. These are my children. They did nothing to deserve being demeaned. My voice cracked. Patricia agrees with me. She's disappointed in you both. By then my kids were marveling at huge steaks at our table. Mom, this is the best dinner ever, Owen declared. Attempting to cut like an adult, I felt it a small, warm victory. Halfway through dessert my phone rang. Mom, voicemail. Dad, voicemail. Michelle, voicemail. Finally I answered. Noel, you need to come back right now, Dad said, panic tightening his voice. No, I don't think I do, I replied. David arrived an hour ago and wants answers. Michelle's lying to him about where she's been. That's her problem. Dad pleaded. Patricia wants a family meeting. She's threatening to review our allowance from the trust. I interrupted with a question. Do you remember what you called me tonight? I asked. What? You called me a servant in front of my children. You told my kids they could have scraps. Scraps like they were dogs. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. We argued. He said they couldn't afford professional services. I told him they'd been getting my unpaid labor for 5 years, bookkeeping, property management, saving them nearly $6,000 yearly. Professional property management runs about 12% of rental income, bookkeeping around $300 a month. The math fell silent on his end. And if you ever want to see Alyssa and Owen again, I said, you and Mom owe them a proper apology. Not a token line, but real acknowledgement. By morning my phone had dozens of missed calls and texts. Mom, Noel, call me immediately. This is ridiculous. Dad, your aunt wants a family meeting. Michelle, thanks a lot, sister. David wants a divorce now. I hope you're happy. Some messages were from outsiders. David texted. Could we talk? There are things about Michelle's behavior you should know. A neighbor, Mrs. Chen, left a warm voicemail. You deserve good things. Cousin Rachel told me she was proud I'd stood up to our parents. Not everyone had been blind to what I'd been feeling. Some relatives had noticed and quietly supported me. A couple of nights later, Michelle knocked at my door. She looked wrecked, makeup smeared, hair a mess. David had asked her to leave. Despite everything, curiosity and caution made me open the door. You destroyed my life, she said, without venom. She looked exhausted. I told the truth. You lied to your husband about where you were going, I countered. You disappeared for days, and that raises alarms. She said marriage felt suffocating, claimed she needed space, and implied I couldn't judge because I wasn't married. She crumpled into tears. I know I've been awful. I know I've been a terrible sister and aunt. I don't know how to be different. She described growing up as my parents' favored child, praised for looks, accomplishments, and the life she built. That pressure had shaped her. For a moment I felt sympathy, but sympathy didn't erase how she'd treated my children. She admitted seeing my kids wait for acknowledgement, reminded her of how I had once tried for our parents' attention. She confessed jealousy, jealousy of my relationship with my children and the unconditional love I received from them. She'd been lonely, her own children distant, craving validation. I don't even know what I've been, she said. We sat in the quiet house and listened to the normal sounds of a sleeping household. She asked, plainly, how do I fix this? How do I be better? I looked at her, and finally, for the first time in years, I recognized glimpses of the little sister who used to sneak into my room during storms and braid friendship bracelets with me. Who cried when our goldfish died? That little Barb wasn't something I could fix. I couldn't repair Michelle's marriage or rewrite her relationship with her children. What I could do was set clear boundaries. If she wanted any relationship with me and my kids going forward, things had to change. What do you mean? She asked. No more comments about Alyssa and Owen being less deserving than Sophia and Mason. No more expecting me to subsidize your lifestyle. No more treating me like the family servant. Michelle nodded slowly. I can do that, and you need help too. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. David had been saying that for years. Maybe she should have listened sooner. She stayed another hour. For the first time in a long while, we had a frank conversation. Michelle talked about feeling trapped, the pressure to keep appearances, and drifting apart from David. I talked about feeling invisible in our own family, juggling jobs to keep us afloat, while she complained about boredom. It wasn't a miracle. We didn't suddenly erase years of hurt, but it was a start. Before she left, she reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. This is what I owe you for the meals, she said. Inside were 6 months' worth of calculations. $800 in cash. This is too much, I said. It's probably not enough, she replied, then paused at the doorway. Noel, thank you. For what? For finally making me face the truth about who I've become. After she left, I sat quietly and felt a mix of pity and anger. Reasons don't excuse harm. The next morning, the chaos started again. Mom called while I prepared breakfast. Noel, you need to do something about your sister. She showed up here at midnight, crying. She's been sleeping in your old room and says her life is ruined. That's not my problem, Mom. She's your daughter. You deal with her. Her tone shifted into scolding, the same one she'd used my whole life. Noel, Elizabeth, don't take that tone with me. I almost laughed. 34 years old, and being lectured. Mom, I have 2 children. Michelle is an adult who made adult choices. She needs family support, like the support you gave Alyssa and Owen on Sunday. Which matters more to you? A long silence. Noel, you're being unreasonable. No, for once I'm being reasonable. I'm protecting my children from people who treat them poorly, even if those people are family. Alyssa and Owen had overheard some of the call. When I knelt to them, I explained as simply as I could. Adults sometimes need hard conversations to make things better. You never have to spend time with people who make you feel bad, even if they're family. What if they say they're sorry? Alyssa asked. Then we'll see if their actions match their words, I replied. The week was full of calls and messages. David thanked me and said he and Michelle would try marriage counseling. He admitted he'd waited too long to address their problems. My phone call forced the confrontation. Patricia, the aunt who watched over the family trust, called to check in. She told me Mom and Dad were scrambling after I withdrew my volunteer services. The property management company they'd hired recommended upgrades that required upfront funds. That's not my problem anymore, I said, feeling a small sting of guilt. Michelle asked if I would pay for therapy. I told her I would consider it, but only after real amends to me and to the children, not empty promises. A few days later, Dad came to my door. He looked older, quieter. I didn't invite him in at first. Noel, we need to talk. If you're here to ask me to come back and manage your rentals, or do your taxes, the answer is no. He lowered his head. I'm here to apologize. Not because Patricia forced me, but because I mean it. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He noticed our modest living room, the children's artwork on the fridge. He sat and said, Noel, I've been a terrible father and a worse grandfather. I have no excuses. I made wrong choices about how I treated you and your children. Why? Why were Michelle's kids always more important? Because it was easier, he admitted. Michelle demanded attention and threw tantrums. You were independent and didn't complain, so I thought you didn't need as much. That's my fault. He asked for forgiveness. I told him forgiveness had to be earned through consistent change. Remembering birthdays, asking about the kids' interests, listening. I warned him, simply, if he ever called me a servant again or told my children they could eat scraps, I'd walk away for good. He nodded. The week ended with Patricia calling again. She'd arranged a family meeting. Everyone will be there, she said. We're going to talk about how this family treats its members. On Sunday, I sat in her drawing room with Alyssa and Owen at my sides. Mom and Dad looked uncomfortable. Michelle glared from a corner, red-eyed. Patricia, composed and resolute, spoke first. This family has lost its way, she began. Noel has been managing your rentals and bookkeeping for 5 years without compensation. She saved you thousands while raising 2 children alone. Meanwhile, Michelle lied to her husband about her whereabouts and expected Noel to subsidize her visits. This entitlement is unacceptable. Dad tried to interrupt, but Patricia cut him off. She addressed Linda directly. Your grandchildren were told they could eat scraps. Explain how that's anything but cruel. The room fell quiet. Patricia turned to Alyssa and Owen. You are important to this family and deserve to be treated with love and respect, she said softly. Then she delivered consequences. Apologies to Alyssa and Owen, sincere apologies, or the parents' monthly allowance from the trust would be suspended. Michelle would reimburse Noel for the meal she'd expected her to cover and apologize for contributing to the humiliation. Going forward, all grandchildren would be treated equally, equal gifts, attention, and respect, and favoritism would bring further consequences. The apologies were awkward, but they happened. The point wasn't sentimentality, it was accountability. Patricia had used the one language this family understood: money and power. After the meeting, Patricia pulled me aside and told me she'd updated her will. Alyssa and Owen would inherit equally with their cousins. I hugged her, feeling unexpectedly lighter. In the weeks that followed, the family changed in practical ways. Mom and Dad hired a property manager and an accountant, and discovered how much I'd actually done. Michelle and David's marriage remained strained, but the crisis pushed them toward counseling. Michelle grew kinder, perhaps partly out of humility, partly from necessity. The biggest change was how my parents treated my kids. The mandated equality felt forced at first, but then became more natural. Mom started asking about Alyssa's activities. Dad joined conversations with Owen. Were they perfect? No, but my children were no longer treated like afterthoughts, and that mattered. Alyssa joined the debate team. Owen stopped shrinking in family gatherings and spoke up more. They were thriving on the respect they finally received. What did I learn? That the most effective response isn't rage, it's refusing to accept disrespect. That one phone call and one dinner could shift the balance, not by destroying the family but by demanding better. We never finished setting that table. That night in Morton's cost me $300 I couldn't really afford, but teaching my children they were worth more than scraps. That was priceless. 2 weeks later, our family continued to adapt. The initial chaos had settled into a more honest way of being. That Sunday wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. A shift toward respect instead of obligation, toward love that shows up in words and actions. Alyssa and Owen still talk about that night as one of their favorite memories, not because of the food, but because their mom showed them they were worth fighting for. That was the lesson I wanted them to keep.